Hi, good morning. Simon, please let me know if there's any problems with the connection. Thank you. Good morning and good evening from New York. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm gonna share my screen with you so you can see the slideshow. Share screen. Thank you. All right. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the Automotive Historians Australian Conference for this opportunity and for organizing this great event. My name is Laura Belik. I'm an architect and urbanist from São Paulo, Brazil. I recently graduated in design studies at Parsons, at the New School in New York, and I am currently based in Brooklyn and working as a part-time faculty at the New School. Today we will expand the automobile discussion beyond Australia's context into a case study in my home country, Brazil, by presenting a paper based on a larger research I did for my master's thesis at Parsons, called Cities to Whom by Whom, the Minhocão Elevated Highway Case Study in São Paulo, Brazil. So let me start. Okay. I'd like to start by giving you a general overview as it follows. The São Paulo of the 20th century was a city built for cars. Its land was a repercussion of the power of the capital and governing influences, mostly pushed by the auto industry. The Avenue Plan ruled how the city would grow and consequently how its population would live. By the turning of the century, this reality started to change. The palimpsest of an era prevails, but its uses have shifted. Today, cities and urban spaces come to life through their use and everyday practices. The population that was once limited by the forms imposed on them have started dictating their needs over the land. Further, people that once focused on claiming their spaces are consequently fighting for urban democracy. To illustrate my point of view, today I will give you an overview of São Paulo's urban history and road formation, and more specifically, I will examine one case study of the Minhocão Elevated Highway and the discussions this piece of infrastructure brings regarding its uses as a road as well as a public space for leisure. What you see in the screen is the Miyako in 2010. The Miyako is targeted as a site around which debates over democracy, rights, and the urban public space are ongoing. Built in the 70s in São Paulo city center, this concrete expressway cuts through the city's landscape, producing an incarnation of the modernist view of progress. Individual automobility offered through ground infrastructure, while still used by about 89,000 commuters daily during rush hour, the Minhocão is unpopular amongst neighbors that suffer from its noise, pollution, and lack of privacy. The structure is also seen as the main catalyst for the degradation of the area that it traverses and for the drastic drop in the real estate value of surrounding properties. It is relevant to return to this now because of the recent announcement of the permanent deactivation of the Minhocão over the course of the next 15 years as part of São Paulo's new strategic plan. The announcement regarding Neocons Future was a direct result of growing popular demands for alternative uses of the highway space. Regardless of the outcomes expected for the structure and the current debate over whether it should be demolished or transformed into a linear park, the victory of popular demand and the initiative of a deliberative approach to a public matter in order to start this conversation are the focal points to be highlighted in this research. Civic participation and demand towards public decisions are growing in Brazil, as we can see with a nationwide protest in the past few years. This research uses the Minhocão Elevated Highway case study to investigate the claims on the use of the infrastructure as a public space, and whether such claims can be a possible mechanism towards urban democracy, towards urban democracy. Sorry. Another important aspect I will analyze is the shift in people's opinions and the consideration of multiple voices and viewpoints about the highway, an element of infrastructure that now is also seen as a common, thus with attendant claims of use rights. I will now present a brief historical overview of São Paulo's urban sprawl. This is the São Paulo city center in the screen. São Paulo growth is directly connected to its industrial history. Francisco Matarazzo, an Italian entrepreneur, started investing in São Paulo in the beginning of the 20th century, producing wheat flour, and in just a few years managed to raise the largest industrial complex in Latin America. From that, the city started to grow at a fast pace. Brazil's massive industrial investment from the 50s onwards specifically affected the Paulista capital as the main location of the automobile industry, which constituted a core economic activity for the city during that period. This industry also guided the way the city would be planned according to the logic of the vehicles that would cross it. São Paulo's automobile industrial complex was the main pillar of attraction for workers from other states, and this flow of people represented Brazil's major internal migratory wave in the 50s. The subsequent decades represented the fastest the city grew. In the 1960s and 1970s, the city experienced an increase of 55%. As expected, industrial growth was associated with intense urbanization. The physical expansion of the city was unfolded through a fragmented process that would emphasize private interest in land speculation. These interventions in the city influenced a series of other roadworks implemented between 1960s and 70s, and amongst them is the Minhocão elevated expressway. After the 70s, the industrial sector started to slowly move out of São Paulo city, replacing their plants into other areas in the greater state of São Paulo. São Paulo city then became a city of services and informational complex. Sorry. This shift of industry. I'm sorry, is everything okay?
That's fine.
Okay. The shift of industry to other cities, the shift of the industry to other cities not only represented the new poles of attraction for workers and new economical strategies within the capital, but also physically left traces of its past behind. Industrial plants, access roads, highways, viaducts, and most importantly, a city scaled and designed for its cars would forever be the reality of the space that does not necessarily function this way anymore. In this sense, the discussions around the futures and current uses of those spaces are of great importance. Oh, sorry. Oh. Okay, sorry. This directly affected how São Paulo dealt with the formation and the use of public spaces in general. Although the city's colonial plan and formation in the downtown area prevails with radial streets converged into largos or enlargements or plazas, combining residential and commercial spaces with planned green spaces and parks for leisure, the extended city has not followed the same or any ordering logic. By the middle of the 20th century, with the city fast-paced sprawl following real estate trends, investments in parks and or other open free areas were not as common. São Paulo's most famous and popular park, the Parque Ibirapuera in the picture, was only built in 1954 on top of a former slum. Although located in a relatively central area, access to the park is only available by car or bus. In order to reach to the park's entrances, the user has to cross large-scale avenues and viaducts of the city. Similar situations of isolation exist in other of the major parks throughout the city. This difficulty of access to parks and open recreational areas led to the formation of an emphasis on other kinds of public spaces through the city. Some of them are private public spaces like sports clubs, shopping malls, and private condominiums. But there are also commercial areas and public transportation modes where there is a constant high influx of people, which started to be reinterpreted and redesigned accordingly, envisioned as a public space as well. These open areas gain enlargements of their sidewalks and pedestrian areas, being used not only as a passageway, but also as an area of leisure. This represented an interesting combination between transitional spaces and spaces of permanence. We can identify a growing organization of people demanding more public spaces of usage, focusing their demands exactly on a particular object, the high-speed, large-scale avenues and streets. In a city like São Paulo, the claim for public spaces is the claim for the use of the streets, and due to this scale, this action demands a broader popular organization. With this overview, we can better comprehend and place the Minhocão as a case study within the city's context. It is important also to understand that popularly driven initiatives towards rethinking public spaces and the uses of São Paulo City are not a particularity of this structure per se, but are a growing demand within many other spaces through the city. Nevertheless, I will explain a little more about the specifics on the Minhocão in this context. The Minhocão was a controversial structure even before its ideation. Conceptualized and commissioned in the 1960s during the Brazilian military dictatorship period that went from 64 to 85, the road opened in January 1970 by the former mayor Paulo Maluf. It stretches from 3.4 kilometers with extension roads connecting the city center to the western part of the town. The road sits 5 meters above ground, and its distance from the surrounding buildings can vary between half a meter to 4.6 meters. The Minhocão was the largest structure of reinforced concrete of Latin America by the time it was built. The negative reaction to the structure through the years started before the Minhocão was even implemented. From the beginning, the media constantly criticized Maluf's engineering attempts. The Minhocão's role as an expressway was threatened and ridiculed after having a massive traffic jam on the day of its inauguration. Another major issue was related to the massive investment in the elevated highway, taking the focus away from the then growing subway system. As for the Minhocão's repercussion on the surrounding area, in less than a year, almost all the apartments and commercial venues in the first floor of the buildings near the structure were emptied out. The remaining inhabitants would represent the resistance. Suffering from noise, pollution, and safety issues on a daily basis, they were the first ones who clamored for improvements in the area, and who received, as a result of their demands, the hours of closure during the nighttime and the entire day on Sundays, which later expanded to Saturdays as well. Gradually, the Minhocão gained adherents that started to use the space in a variety of ways. First, the neighbors themselves began to use the structure for sports activities and recreation, and eventually other people started to pay more attention to the potential the area had. A notable increase of users since the 2000s was the starting point for some neighborhood associations and activist groups to be more organized and get involved with the Minhocão space, introducing social and artistic interventions and contributing to the structure to be used more actively by the general public. These interventions represented a great development towards a new perspective on the uses that the Minhocão structure could have, not only as a highway and infrastructural piece, but ultimately as an urban common. But a closer look at these interventions and actions on the Minhocão space since the 2000s reveals that those activities, active participants claiming the space today, are a different group from the actors that once initiated those organized and protests about the structure. So the Minhocão present situation directly reinforces the role of different popular demands towards the definitions of the new uses of certain space. In this sense, amongst other actors, there are two major groups that are actively discussing the Minhocão's future today. The ones claiming to transform the structure into a linear park, and the ones that want the elevated highway to be demolished. The ones advocating for the park are more media savvy and politically influential. They are constantly promoting events, press releases, and activities related to the structure. They affirm that the park already exists when it comes to its uses. And they count on the support of many leading actors that work or live in the Minhocão surroundings and or correlate with the cause. The ones that fight for the structure to be taken down are a loose coalition, not as large or active, but are constantly present, raising their voice in opposition to the linear park. They are mainly composed of residents who live directly by the structure. Because of the high cost of the structure's demolition, estimated in 80 million reais, which is around 30 million US dollars, different mayors throughout the years lean towards different ideas and outcomes for the structure's future. Today, this discussion is still open-ended, but with the current mayor's announcement of the Minhocão's deactivation, there is a greater expectation to coming to a consensus. So coming to a conclusion, I would like to present some of my final thoughts. The gradual change of people's mindsets over the use of the Miyako as a public space instead of a high-speed road is the result of a collective ideal being incarnated and also represents a lively city that is always reinventing itself. But to officially change the space's purpose reveals an influential shift. In this case, once created in favor of the auto industry and to inspire a certain modern image of São Paulo, today the highway's use must attend to a new ordering logic, the claims and needs of its citizenry. This shift from a top-down tabula rasa approach to the city's design to a bottom-up perspective over the usage of the city already in post form represents a gain towards urban democracy. But it also presents its own internal challenges and contradictions. In this sense, while we have the Minhocão as an example of a spatial aperture for these multiple conversations, the greater paradox we face today is that even though we can celebrate urban spaces as an apparatus for democratic action, these public spaces continue to be recognized as a reflection of the power of influence and private interests around them, prioritizing certain groups over others. Nevertheless, by considering the plurality of voices and having the space to expose them in the first place is already an inclusionary opportunity, admitting new democratic possibilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura. That was absolutely fantastic. We've got some time for questions, about 10 minutes. I might start and then we'll throw it open to the floor, if that's okay. My question really revolves around sort of those special interest groups that you identified, looking at this as a new social and spatial environment to be used in different ways. I have a research interest in urban agriculture. Some of my research that revolves around how spaces are repropositioned in cities around urban agriculture. Is there any evidence to suggest that that's another theme that is emerging at all, particularly maybe in the group that is looking at the park sort of context as a repurposing opportunity? Did you get that?
No, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
That's okay. I'll make this as much briefer. Is there any evidence to suggest that there is urban agriculture as a context with those special interest groups that you've identified as wanting to repurpose the highway?
Sorry, is there any evidence that there's a new purpose for the highway?
Yeah,
Can you
in
repeat
terms
that?
of urban agriculture.
Oh, in terms of urban agriculture. Yes, actually, there is a project called Movement 90 Degrees, translating roughly to English. And project is basically to do vertical gardens on those part of the buildings that don't have any windows, that face directly the Minhocão structure. So they say they are creating this environment that is more green and bringing back the green to a city full of concrete. And there's a bunch of people criticizing that movement as well, because it seems that when you do a vertical garden, and I'm not an expert here, but you don't necessarily, well, there's very little earth involved, so it's not that you can plant a lot of things or grow a lot of things, although you can, but it's more of an aesthetic movement than actually an idea of creating, well, that's what gardens are for, actually. So I know everyone has a different opinion about it, but yes, there are a bunch of, I think for now there are 3 or 4 buildings that already have the vertical wall implemented, and yeah, that's the closest I can get to the garden within the Miyako structure now.
Thank you very much. I'll start, so I'm going to basically repeat questions. So is there any other questions for Laura based on her presentation? Laura, I'll repeat the questions that I asked on the board.
Okay.
Andrew Grant, Laura, did the project draw inspiration from the New York High Line Railway conversion into an urban park?
Did you hear that, Laura?
No, I'm sorry.
Andrew Grant has asked, did the project in São Paulo draw any inspiration from the High Line project that has been so successful in the city you now are sitting in?
Yes, so the High Line is definitely a big inspiration for the groups that advocate for the park. So they use the High Line very often when they say that the park could work, and here's how, and they show the High Line as an example. And in terms of its, if they would transform it into a park, how do you do that? And like, what's the technique that you would use? So they use the High Line always as an example. But yeah, so that would be the closest for now that they use for, because since we cannot, well, the use of the structure as a park is not institutional for now, they cannot do a permanent intervention in the structure, but if they would, they always use the High Line as an inspiration.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I was going to ask about the image you had with the lots of Volkswagens coming out of what appeared to be a building. And I was wondering, in Brazil, what were the major manufacturers of automobiles? I mean, clearly Volkswagen was one of them, but what were the other major producers of automobiles in Brazil in the post-war decades?
So this question really derives from its inspiration from the image you put up of the Volkswagens, the Volkswagens sort of in the traffic jam. And the question was, apart from Volkswagen, what other major makes or makers of cars, brands dominated the Brazilian market?
So I particularly chose to put the Beetle image and the Volkswagen because they were the major industry that came, that was implemented in São Paulo. I think they are still the major one, although other, like Ford or other companies also had factories in São Paulo, and they were very proud to produce the Beetle and the van in Brazil, but I'm not really sure. That's definitely not my the focus of my research, so I'm not really sure. But usually when you talk about the auto industry in São Paulo, the Volkswagen is the first industry that people quote because of the production, the high production. And even in photos, as you can see from the photos from the 70s and onwards, there's a lot of Beetles in the streets. So that was one of the most popular cars back then, and especially because it was it was produced nationally. Yeah, it was produced in Brazil, so people would buy more and didn't have to import cars and stuff. So yeah, I'm sorry if I couldn't answer much better than that.
I believe the combi was produced there up until lighting.
Hi, I'd just like to ask about the condition or the state of the urban environment underneath the overpass, the elevated highway currently, and what are the plans for the activist groups under there? What do they want? What does it look like? And is there a role for the automobile in whatever their plans are?
So the question, Laura, is what is the state of the space, the area under the highways, the underpass, as we call it? What do the stakeholder groups who are advocating for a change, what do they want to do with that space? And is there a role, is there evidence of what role the automobile may play in the transition of that space?
Okay, so correct me if I understood the question wrong, but the roles of the stakeholders and what would be the role of the automobile within the new uses of the structure?
Particularly underneath the structure, so the area underneath the highway.
Oh, the area under, okay, under. All right, so if the structure continues to be there and it becomes a park or something, the area underneath would continue on being an avenue as it is right now. Actually, there's a bus lane and 1 or 2 rows for cars. And recently, the current mayor actually put 2 bike lanes, one going one way, the other one coming back. And that was extremely controversial. A lot of people hated it, a lot of people loved it because it's already a very heavy traffic jam. So it's hard to believe that they would take out the avenue from there. Even so, if it's a park, will continue to be an avenue, and if it's not a park, if they demolish the structure, we will continue to be an avenue in the same way. But there are a lot of plans to change the traffic lines, not to go through exactly that space that the Minhocão occupies anymore, because either way, turning the structure down or transforming into a park, there will have a major shift on how the roads around it should work to accommodate the amount of vehicles that needs to use the space. There is a subway line that actually goes along more or less the same avenue path. So the idea would be also to increment the capacity of the subway to make people use less cars and make the city center, actually that would be the ultimate goal, to make the city center not used for vehicles anymore, but only pedestrians.
I think we've got time for one more question. We'll have one more question, Laura.
Okay.
Thank you. The question is, in the demolition of this highway, it was considered just the cost of $13 million. why both the parties, the one for the park and the one for demolishing the highway, there is not any other consideration of other possible costs, like the cost of the positive or negative externalities, like social costs that can be saved or not in supporting their claims.
So Laura, the question is really I suppose, an economic question. So there was, I think, a figure of $30 million in terms of the cost of projects. And that there are two very sort of different, almost polar opposite groups advocated for green space versus demolition. The question really is why were there no other considerations or cost considerations, for instance, externalities, for instance, the influence of social costs and what that might mean or is there any other considerations for you that you didn't mention?
It's cutting a lot. So what I got is that is an economic question, that the cost for demolition is $30 million, and then it got cut, sorry.
Okay, so the two groups seem to be advocating demolition and the other group renewals.
Yes.
Were there any other cost-benefit analyses or considerations, for instance, externalities? For instance, the social cost of demolition versus social capital cost of renewals.
Yeah, oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So yeah, each group advocates for a different thing. This 30 million figure was actually they came up with this number, I think about 10 years ago. So they would have to rethink the numbers nowadays to know how much it will cost exactly, but that was the last information they did regarding this. And there are other projects that are sort of in between demolishing it completely or doing partial demolitions that would cost less. And the social factor it's very interesting because there's a whole movement of getting the population back to the city center. So nowadays, the people that live around the structure are mainly lower income population that can live there because the area is degraded. So a lot of both of the groups actually advocate for once the structure goes down or the structure becomes a park, there will be an increase in real estate in the value of the area. So the 30 millions can come back if you get partnerships that would from engineering firms that would be interested in the area or something like that, kind of lobbying the space in some sort of a way. And so I guess that costs could be flexible in this sense, depending on the option that it turned out to be for the elevated highway. But it's definitely a toss because we don't know what the final project would be. And because also the law now says that they can use the Minhocão space within the next 15 years, but making the use less often and per year, you'll never know because every 4 years there's a new mayor and the new mayor has different ideas for the space and also the cost to change through space. So it's pretty hard to talk in economic values about the space in this sense. I don't know if I could answer so precisely, but those are the informations I have.
Very interesting perspectives. Laura, thank you very much. Can everyone mute? Laura, thank you for